Tell me a bit more about yourself and how did you start on the piano?
So, my name's James Pearson. At the moment, we're sitting in Ronnie Scott's Jazz Club in the heart of London, where I'm the artistic director. I've been here for 15 years as the house piano player and artistic director, which means I get involved in all the band bookings and the sort of creative shape that the club outputs throughout the world. But before that, so I started playing the piano, which is my main thing, when I was about 3. As soon as I could open the lid on the thing at home, I used to bash away at it, and then had lessons from about 5 onwards. So I've been playing for over 45 years now. Did my first concert when I was 7, got a review in the local paper for my small piece I played, and then just went through, always studied classical music, never studied jazz, but had jazz music and other sorts of genres alongside, but I always had a sort of quite a formal training, did the grades, and went to Guildhall, did 4 years there, and then after that, this was all again studying classical music and orchestration. After that, I just sort of worked in various jobs, as in musical jobs, playing either jazz groups or cocktail piano or orchestrating stuff, or a lot of classical piano for some of my friends from the Guildhall days, so, which is still carried on to this day. I often go to Amsterdam and play with a guy called Dominic Seldes, who was at college with Tom Kemp and all that lot. I literally do all sorts of music.
Yeah, and how did you come to jazz? Did the Guildhall have a jazz department at the time? Or?
They did, but I had come to jazz a lot earlier.
Yeah.
And I came to it, I think because my father used to play some jazz records when I was very little, and they obviously made him quite sort of, you know, in a buoyant mood, which obviously appealed to me. And also my grandparents used to sing a lot of Fats Waller songs, and they bought me a record when I was 9 of Fats Waller. And his songs were quite funny for a 9-year-old, like things like Your Feet's Too Big. They had funny titles, which actually appealed to me, and I wasn't really aware what a brilliant piano player he was. The sounds like this guy was having a lot of fun doing what he did, and that definitely what appealed to me about the sort of jazz side of things. And so I used to learn how to play that music by ear and worked it out. I mean, Fats Waller had a big stretch. He had hands like Rachmaninoff. So I couldn't quite do that, but you know.
Yeah.
But I've got little tape cassette recordings of me trying to play him stuff when I was about 11 or 12.
Yeah.
And I think that musical routing, because it was early jazz as such, you know, 1920s, 30s stuff, it really led me to have a sort of good level of harmonic knowledge about how the next level of, you know, the bebop stuff. Yeah. I also played the double bass as well in a band in Cambridge where we grew up. That's where I learned about the roots of the chords and the harmonies, and it was all done subconsciously through on the gigs, where jazz has always been really learnt on the bandstand. Yeah. You can study it, you know, as far as what scales and there's certain things that will work over certain chords, but practice comes when you're putting them in application on the stage as such. And so I soon learnt, usually by mistakes, if I played some bad chords behind a trumpet player, they would let you know, sometimes physically, you know, it's like you get a bit of a clobber on the head or something like that. And so jazz has always been running in tandem with the classical, and I find it so useful because I do a lot of jazz composition, and I'm able to bring in harmonies that many jazz musicians wouldn't possibly use because I listen to so much classical music, especially Messiaen and Debussy and Ravel and all that sort of stuff. And some of the English composers, people like Herbert Howells. Yeah. I love all that harmony, and Vaughan Williams, the parallels, Frederick Delius, you know, all those lovely 9th and 13th chords. Yeah. And if you go back to 1930, what Delius was writing was pretty much the same as some of the jazz arrangers and composers at the time.
Yeah. I was actually going to ask you, did you find that your classical training helped you when you came to jazz, or were there some aspects of classical training that you had to let go of?
So the classical training definitely helped. It also was a bit restrictive as well, because I became quite aware of technique. Getting a good quality sound, it really helps.
Absolutely.
Let's look at that first. And, you know, really knowing how to get out of the piano or whatever instrument you play, the full range. Unfortunately, not so much now, but a lot of jazz musicians are quite limited in the actual sound they can produce. It's all about the notes. They think about the right notes to play, but they don't necessarily think about the attack or the way to play. I mean, obviously it's natural.
It can sometimes be a bit display of technique, do you think?
Absolutely. Yeah. It has a disadvantage having had a lot of classical if you've got a good technique, because sometimes you can end up playing things you know will work and they'll show off, and they will do really well, but they're not necessarily musically right, or they haven't got much depth of thought. Obviously, the older you get, the more you're aware of that. But when you're young, sort of 18, 19, 20, and you've learnt a few incredible technical passages, you will apply them to nearly every time you get the chance to play that little run. And after a while, it does wear off. Let's put it that way, because you realise music in order to survive, has to have a deeper level. When I was at the Guildhall and was studying Beethoven, some of his sets of variations, I used to do my own variation after, variation one, and then it's sort of jazz version, but still of that variation. And some of the more eclectic things I've done, for example, at Music at Morlin, or I did it in St Martin's in the Fields, is I've done the Bach Inventions, and then I've done an improvisation after each one. So the whole thing is it's a continuous piece of music. And I think a lot of pianists have done this, but it's not necessarily jazz music I'm playing, but it's certainly not. I'm not improvising in the style of Bach. It's just very much instant composition, but linking them up. Because if I suddenly turned it all into a sort of blues, it would sound wrong. Do you know what I mean? So it's about musical awareness, I think. And obviously, the classical, you've got so much history of music that you can go on anything.
Absolutely. Do you find that your training in composition as well and arrangement, does that feed into your jazz playing as well?
Absolutely, in the sense that I like to think about when I'm playing solo, for example, very much as a composition, in the sense that I'll try and play something that is cohesible to me, the rest of the band, but also to an audience, and show them how I develop that idea. That is basically the concept. I do it, and sometimes that works better than others. And it's usually that you start with a simple phrase, develop it within, so that people can see where you're going. At some point, the theory is that they then are just trusting what you're doing with it. Do you see what I mean? So it's not like I'm consciously saying, right, I'm going to do 5 notes here, and then I'm going to do 8 notes there. It's very much done au naturel. And that's the melodic element of it. The arrangement side of it, I like to think of the harmony like that, especially with, the left hand. I often think in colours, like this would be the saxophone section, how it would be punctuating the harmonies, or, if you're playing block chords on the piano, it's very much like you're writing for a saxophone section. So to get that sort of, and I definitely think of it as in colours. And that also is something that Beethoven used to do as well, it's sort of, he'd have 3 or 4 different elements going on.
Do you have synesthesia? Or do you think in synesthetically?
I definitely don't have synesthesia. But I can, in a sense, I can teach myself to give a certain text. I think I definitely have a feeling about keys and harmonies. It's certainly not like a purple light or anything, or stars flying around. But I'm interested in that, and also I'm very interested in harmonics, the physics of music, how it works. It's a very complex thing, and I don't really understand it too much, but it does amaze me the way sound works, and how the dog whistle, they can hear it, we can't. The entity of sound, and also just the way harmonics exist. And it fascinates me because a lot of harmony has come out of physics in the early days, ratios and all that. And what fascinates me is there's so many mistakes in music, the way you have to tune a piano. You have to create an illusion that it's in tune, because it's technically, after you've done the first 3 or 4 octaves from around middle C, you have to tune it slightly out of tune to make it sound in tune at the higher and the lower registers. Because if you were to tune it physically completely correct, it would sound wrong. And that amazes me. And it's in the sense that whether the senses have been numbed down, or we've just got so used to hearing it in a certain way. I'm quite interested in all that. I mean, I certainly wouldn't want to go and play on I like it when the piano's in tune and things like that. I have got a perfect pitch, which is really helpful for transcribing things. It's not as perfect that it will stop me from getting irritated if it's not in tune. Do you know what I mean? So it's a bit more like relative perfect pitch.